you ever felt watched by something that has no eyes? There is a place where the cold doesn't come from the weather. It comes from what's trapped underground. They said it was just a warehouse. But no one survives in a place where the walls breathe and the boxes whisper your name. What happens when the horror isn't outside but inside you? Before we answer, we need to go down, much deeper. I used to believe that the worst pain was losing someone. Today I know, even worse is realizing that it was you who caused the loss. There was something rotten inside me, something that grew silently while I pretended to be fine. At first, it was just small distractions, an extra drink, a forgetfulness here, an absence there, things anyone could explain away. Stress, pressure, midlife crisis. But no, it was my soul shattering, one piece at a time, and I didn't even realize it. I lost my job one gray morning. The manager avoided my eyes as he explained, in that soft, cowardly voice, that the company was cutting costs. But we both knew why. I showed up drunk, messed up orders, argued with customers. I was no longer trustworthy, nor useful, nor necessary. Mary Lynn cried when I told her, not out of anger, out of fear that this was the point of no return, and maybe it was. In the weeks that followed, our house began to sink with me. The paintings she loved began to disappear from the walls, sold for pennies. The sound of empty bottles became more common than the sound of our conversation. I talked to the shadows and avoided the mirror. I began to hear noises at night, creaks, footsteps on the ceiling, something moving behind the wooden walls. But the worst noise came from inside. It was the sound of a heart beating out of rhythm, of a man who was no longer whole. Deep down, I knew she was still trying to save me. He tried with sweet words, then with threats, then with silence, and nothing worked. I remember waking up on the couch one day, with a metallic taste in my mouth and a strange light filtering through the curtains. I had a hallucination, or at least I thought I was. A figure standing in the hallway, high, property, watching me. I blinked, and it was gone, but the feeling remained. A presence, as if something had entered me and decided to stay. That night, Mary Lynn slept at her sister's house. I was alone, with the silence, with the voices, with the cold that didn't come from outside. There was a crack in the living room wall, a nearly invisible fissure that seemed to grow larger day by day. I'd find myself staring at it for hours as if waiting for something to burst out. Sometimes, I swore I heard a whisper coming from it, as if the house were breathing. In fact, I think I was the one who had stopped breathing. Little by little, everything was moving away from me. My friends, my dreams, my lucidity. I started forgetting people's faces, my own face. It seemed like time passed differently inside the house. Days lasted minutes, minutes lasted centuries. I no longer knew what was real. If I stepped onto the living room floor or floated in some limbo made of memory, guilt, and imaginary snow. But one thing was clear. Something inside me had been activated, something I could no longer contain, and that's where the real horror begins. The breaking point came like a bolt of lightning in the middle of the night. It was a Tuesday, I think, or Thursday. It didn't matter anymore. Time, for me, was just a sequence of hangovers and forgetfulness. I was in the living room, staggering past empty bottles and ghosts only I could see when I heard the television. I didn't remember turning it on. It just came on. The screen flickered between dead channels and nervous static, as if something was trying to communicate, but I couldn't quite figure out how, until it stopped on a local broadcast. Urgent news. Explosion at a downtown hardware store. Possible arson. Owner on the run. The picture was from my old store, or what's left of it. A pile of charred beams and black smoke. My name was in the caption. My face was in the corner of the screen. And then I realized I had done it. That confused night, drunk, driven by a silent hatred against everything that reminded me of failure. Mary Lynn arrived a few minutes later, with his face wet with tears and his eyes wide as if he saw a stranger in his own home. She looked at me as if she already knew. "You set fire to the store, didn't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My silence was enough. She screamed. She screamed like never before, as if she wanted to expel me not just from the house, but from reality. Every word was a blade, every tear, a sentence. When he threw the ring on the floor, I felt like I heard the sound of a bone breaking. That night I slept in the car, and the next day, I left. No goodbyes, no plans. I took the longest, coldest, emptiest road, and I walked away without looking back. As I drove north, something inside me finally snapped. I didn't cry. I didn't think. I could only hear the roar of the engine and the metallic sound of something scratching my mind. The road seemed to have no end. The world grew colder with every mile, as if I were descending into a hell covered in ice and darkness. The radio failed. The poles disappeared. The sky was a heavy, starless mass. I slept in abandoned gas stations, with dirty blankets and the smell of kerosene. And even in these godforsaken places, there were whispers. People who said that up there was work, but no one said exactly where or what. That's how I found out about the place. A warehouse up north, where the sun doesn't rise. If you can handle the cold, they'll pay you well, but don't ask questions. And at that point in my life, questions were a luxury I could no longer afford. The last named city was hundreds of miles away. After her, the road turned into a trail. The trail turned into snow, and the silence became company. I followed in what was left of the car, an old clunker that coughed and creaked like a wounded animal. I don't know how it kept working. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was a force that wanted me to get there. Until the end of the world, I passed through small villages where the streetlights were dark, the windows were boarded up, and the eyes of the residents followed me as if they recognized the mark of the condemned man. They knew I was going in the wrong direction, the only direction I had left. In one of these frozen villages, an old man sold me a gallon of gas and said something that resonates to this day. Don't look back after you cross the line. If you hear voices, keep walking. And for God's sake, never light a cigarette in the dark. I laughed. At that time, I still thought that the worst the world could offer me was what I already carried in my chest. How wrong I was. The temperature dropped hour by hour. The GPS stopped working. The sky grew whiter every day until there was no sky at all. Just a dull, dense void, as if the world were trapped inside a fog lamp. The compass was spinning in circles, and I drove aimlessly until the road ended. Literally, a low, ice-covered fence marked the end, and there was a man waiting for me. He was big, broad shoulders, hands like shovels. He wore a military coat and a black cap that hid most of his face. When I opened the window, he just said, "You came." I didn't ask how he knew who I was. At that point, I had already accepted that nothing made sense. I just turned off the engine and continued on foot, guided by him. The car was left behind along with what was left of my life. We walked for hours under absolute white. The snow seemed to rise up to his knees. There were no trails, there were no sounds, just the wind, and a constant feeling that something was watching us even when we stopped. The man did not speak, until finally he pointed to a distant spot on the frozen plain. There was the storage. It was bigger than I imagined. A long, low metallic construction, half buried in ice, with rusty chimneys belching black smoke. The walls were covered in sheets of ice with marks, like scratches, and yet it seemed to be vivo, like a sleeping animal, waiting. The big guy looked at me and said, for the second time, "No questions, no cell phones, no going out after lights out." Understood. I just shook my head. My body was shaking, but it wasn't just cold. It was the feeling that I had crossed over into a world where the rules were no longer human. The warehouse gate opened with a metallic groan, as if resisting letting anyone in or anything out. Inside, the air was colder than outside, a dry, biting chill that penetrated the bones and seemed to feed on the body's heat. Fluorescent lights flickered in the high ceiling, held by cables that looked ready to give way. The structure was enormous, divided by rows of metal shelves filled with gray boxes, all unmarked. The sound of my boots echoed as if someone was following me, always one step behind. I was led to a small room in the back. An iron bed, a thin blanket, a yellow light bulb hanging by exposed wires. There was a lock inside the door. I asked, "Why is that?" The man simply replied, "You will understand." The following days, if they were days at all, passed as a hazy sequence of repetitive tasks and heavy silences. There were no windows. The artificial light never dimmed. The night outside was absolute. In the Arctic, in winter, the sun disappears for months. But what I felt went beyond the natural darkness. It was an absence of time, an absence of God. I was trained to stack boxes, to move things from one place to another, never open anything, never ask about the contents. The other workers avoided talking. Sunken eyes, trembling hands. They walked like zombies, except one, a thin, patchy-bearded Russian who approached me on the third day. He took me aside and said in a low voice, "Sometimes, the boxes move by themselves." Before I could answer, he walked away, and that was the last time I saw him. In the dining room, an old television showed only static snow. I stared at her for hours. Sometimes I thought I saw faces forming in the noise. Faces stretched out, as if they were screaming from inside the screen. The food tasted like rust. The water was thick, milky. My body started to change. I dreamed of teeth, claws, a dark tunnel with glowing eyes. And I would wake up with a heavy chest, as if something was sitting on top of me, breathing along with me. But the worst was yet to come. In the first week, alarm bells rang. An electronic scream echoed through the metallic corridors. The red lights flashed, doors locked automatically. We ran to the east wing, where one of the boxes had opened alone. What we saw? No one commented on it afterwards. I only remember the sound, a wet, flesh-sliding sound, and eyes, too many eyes, on the wall. That night, the big guy called me for a chat. We were in the generator room, surrounded by exposed cables and loud noises. He said, "This isn't a warehouse, it's a depot, between what's human and what isn't." I wanted to laugh, but he was serious. He added, "For centuries, things have fallen from the sky. Most burn, some don't. We keep what shouldn't be touched, but sometimes it rings true." I wanted to leave. He denied it. "You're in, now it's over, or you'll become part of the stock." And that's when I knew there was no way out. The first thing that is lost in that place is the notion of time. The second is hope. Outside, it was pitch black. No stars, no dawn. The polar night swallowed everything, like a living, hungry entity. And inside, the fluorescent light flickered as if it resisted going out. Gradually, I realized that the light wasn't just illumination, it was protection. When she blinked, the air inside the warehouse changed. It became dense. A smell of rust and damp meat spread, and the noises began. Steps, scratches, sounds of something breathing, very close, but never visible. In the third week, the boxes started moving around on their own. Nobody talked about it. The security cameras only showed static when this happened. One of the workers, a young man with hollow eyes who slept in the top bunk, disappeared. It just evaporated. The bed was intact except for a scratch on the mattress, as if something had lain down beside him and taken his form away. That same night, I woke up to a strange sound, one hissing, as if someone was whispering my name. From the other side of the wall, I touched the cold concrete and felt vibrations, pulsations. The wall had a heartbeat. It was at this point that I began to understand what this place really was. The warehouse was not just a storage place. It was a body, a prison, a living organism. And we, the workers, were the white blood cells, trying to contain something writhing inside the boxes, something that whispered in dead languages, something that fed on the absence of light. There were rules that began to make sense too late. 1. Never open a box. 2. Never be alone when the lights flash. 3. Never, under any circumstances, try to leave through the back door. No one talked about the back door, but everyone avoided her. She was sealed with thick chains on the outside, and yet, every now and then, beat alone. 3 rings, always at the same time, as if someone or something waited to be let in. One day I was trapped in C-Wing during a power outage. The lights failed. Darkness swallowed me like a cloak. And then, the whispers began. They didn't come from far away. They came from inside my head. Overlapping voices, ancient ones, languages I never learned but somehow understood. They talked about hunger, of promises, from a hole dug in the ice where time bends, and where the forgotten wait to be freed. When the lights came back on, there were claw marks on the floor, and my coat was ripped in the back, but I didn't remember falling. Little by little, I understood. It wasn't just a job, it was a constant ritual. Keep the chaos asleep, working to contain what should never have been found. And the cold, the silence, the loneliness, these were just the first warnings. The true horrors had not yet awakened, but they were about to open their eyes. It was a Friday, or at least that's what they called it. At that time, the days no longer had names, just shades of fear. The siren sounded at 3:17. I had never played at that time. The sound was not like before. It was more serious, organic, like a scream coming from the bowels of the warehouse itself. The lights went out completely. This time did not return. The emergency generator failed. The security system has crashed. The doors that were supposed to seal opened with metallic clicks, and from the back of Wing B, something began to crawl. I heard, not with the ears, but with the bones, a wet sound, a slow, noisy friction, like raw flesh rubbing against steel. I ran to the central sector. Other workers screamed. Some locked doors, others broke open boxes, hoping to protect themselves with what was inside. A mistake. The boxes were worse open. Something came out of one of them that shouldn't have moved. It was a dark, shapeless mass, covered in translucent membranes. No eyes, but what looked. No mouth, but what is shouted. The air grew heavy. The oxygen is gone. I felt as if I were inside a dark womb, where everything pulsed and moaned. The creatures advanced unhurriedly. They didn't run. They knew they would win. The Russian who had warned me weeks ago tried to escape through the ducts. We saw him being pulled back by something that had no fingers, but it still grabbed on. When the creature pulled him, he didn't scream. It disappeared, as if it never existed. I hid in one of the cold rooms. Inside, it was absolutely cold, but at least there was silence. For a few minutes, I thought I was safe, until you see the steam of a breath that was not mine. Behind me, in the darkness of the chamber, something exhaled, a rotten breath, like meat left in the ice for millennia. I turned the flashlight, and for an instant, I saw she had my face, but it was distorted, like a reflection in a broken mirror, an alternate me, frozen in an eternal scream, with hollow, empty eyes, as if the soul had been sucked out long ago. She came closer and whispered in my own voice, "Stay. This is the end. This is home. Run." Furiously, I walked through collapsing hallways, lights bursting, walls bleeding. Try. The concrete bled. The boxes opened by themselves, one by one, and from within came things that the mind does not understand. Formless beings, made of distorted memories, figures that seem to remember our guilt, as if they were mirrors of our worst sins. Screams echoed, but no one else was alive, just me. And the center of the warehouse was crumbling, the ground was breaking, and from within the earth, something was awakening. I saw eyes, hundreds, thousands, as if a single creature, the size of a city, was breathing beneath us at all times. And now, I woke up. On the wall, an ancient inscription I had never noticed before. "Those who dig the abyss make it their dwelling." And I understood. We didn't keep monsters. We were the food. It was then that I saw the stairs, an emergency exit hidden behind a corroded panel. I went up, and without thinking, each step vibrated as if it were about to fall. Behind me, I heard the sound of hundreds of feet, non-human, not alive. More than me followed. The staircase seemed endless. Each step creaked beneath my feet as if whispering, "You shouldn't be here." Behind me, the sounds continued. There were many. They were all screams without mouth, crying without eyes, roars that seemed to come from within my own chest. I went up by instinct. There was no plan. There was no hope, only despair, and the certainty that a stay was to die, or worse, it was be absorbed. The hatch at the top was jammed. I used all the strength I had left. I screamed. I pushed with my shoulders. I felt my nails breaking, and when he finally gave in, the light blinded me. It was day, the first day in months. I fell into the snow like a corpse returned by the earth. The cold outside seemed toxic, after so long inside the hot rod of the warehouse. But I breathed, and for the first time, the air didn't taste like blood. Behind me, the hatch closed with a dull click. Alone. Nothing chased me. Nothing pulled me back. It was as if that thing down there had let me go, out of pity, or out of contempt, maybe, because now I belonged to him. I walked for days, aimless, not knowing if it was real. I saw an abandoned radio station and took refuge there, and that's where I'm recording this from now, with fingers cut by ice, with eyes that never close again. They're still down there. I know, and I feel that something came with me, a whisper, a shadow, a second heartbeat inside my chest. Something woke up, and I don't know how long I can hold it. So listen, if you heard all this, don't go to the north. Don't take easy work anywhere the map doesn't recognize. Don't trust anyone who doesn't blink. And for the love of what is still sacred, never open a box that was not made by human hands. What, exactly, were those creatures trying to protect? Why did they let him escape just now? And most importantly, what happens to those who take the horror out of the warehouse? If you want to understand what's actually stored in the boxes, and why the ebook with extra details is in the pinned comments. But be careful. There are things that are better never to know.